If you've been to any of these in the past, you know that we normally have them catered with locally sourced food. If you notice, today we did not do that. We have some apples, carrots, granola bars, some fruit cups, and sandwich materials available back there. We did that because myself and maybe some of you in the audience were participating in the SNAP challenge this week, which is kind of a simulation of living off SNAP benefits. And so to do that, to kind of be in kind of a coordination with those doing that, and also just kind of to be along with the theme of the week, we decided to all of our food for this event would kind of be kind of SNAP official, I guess. And so all the prices are back there, and if you've got any of the food, our interns, Caitlin and Erica, kind of explain what's going on. So hopefully feel free to dig in, get some food, and kind of enjoy the event. So now Ashton's going to introduce.
Yeah, and we're really hoping to have a discussion around sustainability and homelessness in the Lowcountry, and kind of getting the story behind the people that we see in our city and in our community, and kind of the troubles that are affiliated with that. And so I'm so excited and happy to introduce Dan Dickison. He is campus liaison with the Office of Sustainability and the director for college marketing here on campus. So thanks, Dan.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate you guys being here today, especially those of you who are students. Because it demonstrates to us that you're willing to consider this important issue, and even further willing to grapple with it, and perhaps even take some action on it. And that is really encouraging. We're fortunate to have a distinguished panel of people today who work within this issue in various ways, and I'm going to introduce them in a moment, but I wanted to give you a little context on this matter from a more national perspective. Homelessness isn't anything new in our society. As a matter of fact, researchers who study this have documented homelessness in our country, in North America, for European settlers dating back to 1640. And elsewhere in the world, we know that it existed even before that. It's important to remember that homelessness isn't really so easy to quantify. It's got various classifications, and we're going to learn more about that. But according to the National Coalition for the Homeless, in most cases, it's not a permanent condition. It's more of a temporary circumstance for most people who are considered homeless. So a more useful measure regarding the magnitude of homelessness isn't the number of people who are homeless, but those who experience this over a given period of time. The statistics that are available on this issue tell us that this is a persistent concern for our society. And I would posit that it's more than that. It's a growing problem. In the 1980s, the US government determined that there were somewhere between 200,000 and 500,000 individuals who experienced homelessness in that period of time, each year actually. And there was some level of public awareness regarding this, and certainly some government programs that were enacted, devised and enacted to address it. Now let's flip the calendar forward about 25 years. In 2009, the number of people in the US who experienced homelessness increased. And depending upon the source that you cite, somewhere between 643,000 and 1.6 million people experienced homelessness that given year. Another approximation tells us that this is a study that was done by the National Law Center on Homelessness and Poverty, and they estimate that approximately 3.5 million people will experience or are likely to experience homelessness in a given year. Those statistics really ought to grab you. And if they don't, because here we are in a country that has over 300 million people, so you're thinking maybe, okay, 1% of us are affected by this. But consider within that population, 23% of homeless people are military veterans. And 25% are families, are children under the age of 18. So that's pretty staggering. And in fact, families are actually the fastest growing segment of the homeless population. So when you stop to consider, okay, this is all occurring within the largest economy in the world, and a nation that still has the highest consumption rate, that really sort of puts it into perspective. And as you might imagine, the statistics, if you look at it on a state level, are even equally daunting. In South Carolina, over 2,200 people experienced homelessness in 2012. It doesn't really seem like a big number, and we've got 4.8 million people living in the state of South Carolina. But then you look more closely at it, and of those 2,200, 27% were families. And within that, 17% were children. So when you think families are homeless and children are homeless, that portends future homelessness, and it's it's not a very encouraging statistic. And then you also have to consider the large pool of people who are at risk for homelessness, those families who are caught in the foreclosure storm, for example. And you could posit that homelessness isn't just a problem, but it is approaching a crisis status. And I'm sure you guys can elaborate on that a little bit more. Or maybe you can refute that, which would be nice. I think that some of this is overwhelming, and it sort of posits that we have sort of this tacit acceptance of homelessness. It's just another aspect of contemporary life in America. And when you think about that, that notion is actually nowhere more pronounced than in the lack of media coverage regarding this issue. It's amazing how rarely we learn about homelessness through our media outlets. There was a study that was done about this, and it actually spanned a spectrum of time of 25 years, from 1981 to 2005. And they looked at the 3 major television networks over that period of time and determined that in their news programming, 2.6 minutes of coverage per year per network was what they averaged on this issue. So that's fewer than 3 minutes a year covering the issue of homelessness, which is pretty staggering. And so the easy inference here is that homelessness doesn't matter. At least it doesn't matter to television news editors. And one of the most telling aspects of that same study was their attempt to quantify the terminology that was used in those news broadcasts. During that span of time, the phrase increase in homelessness was spoken 13 times. The phrase national problem was used 9 times. The words ban and or remove were used 8 times. And the words solution to homelessness came up and were spoken just once. So I think that demonstrates that there's an uneasiness surrounding much of this issue. And that really causes sort of a lack of acknowledgement of it. And too often, when it is acknowledged, homelessness prompts a negative response from people, which is really unfortunate. I think it's even more unfortunate the policy response that we see from certain municipalities. A 2005 study by the National Coalition for the Homeless cited an increase in cities that are legislating against homelessness, that's a growing trend where city governments are turning to the criminal justice system as a response to people who are living in public spaces. Effectively, what they're doing is criminalizing homelessness. And you don't need to look far for evidence of this. I don't know if you guys are aware of what happened in Columbia, South Carolina just a couple of months ago, but I'll give you a quick summary of that. In August, the city council took action to address what many businesses were telling them was a problem. The businesses were fearing that there were homeless people who were gathered in a certain sector of downtown were a threat to their livelihood and a threat to the safety of their customers and their employees. So they put pressure upon the city council to deal with this, and what the city council did unanimously was determine that their plan would be to take these individuals and offer them a choice. If you're going to stay downtown, we're going to arrest you. If we arrest you, we're going to jail you. Or we can remove you to this remote shelter on the outskirts of town. And then effectively you would be, is what the folks at the National Coalition called pseudo-jailing. So one individual director at that National Coalition called this the most comprehensive anti-homeless measure that he'd ever seen proposed in any city in the United States over the last 30 years. Well, not surprisingly, this measure prompted a pretty big backlash, and that backlash came from the city police, from city workers, and also from advocates for the homeless. And so the city council had to rescind its decision and decide that it was going to go in a different route, and that's where it stands now. And the police chief, or the interim police chief at the time, said it so succinctly: homelessness is not a crime. Columbia's response may be one of the most aggressive, but it's not the only city in the United States that has taken this tack. We know that places such as Sarasota, Florida, and Lawrence, Kansas, and Atlanta, Georgia resort to aggressive measures that ultimately mistreat and marginalize and even criminalize homeless individuals. The National Coalition for the Homeless actually maintains a list of what it calls the 20 meanest cities in the U.S. You can actually look that up. But fortunately, I want to dwell on the encouraging stories that there are, because we do have good work that is being done in this issue coming from places like Washington, D.C. and Pasadena, California, and even Dallas, Texas. For example, the city managers and council members there have opted to address homelessness in a more compassionate and responsible way. Dallas is currently considering a 3-year plan that will actually, they hope, serve as a blueprint to end homelessness. And they're not going to do it by outlawing living in public spaces. They're going to do it by offering permanent, supportive housing to help homeless individuals transition to living on their own in safety. Now, this is an issue that we'll learn has no easy solutions, and it's important that we be honest about that and acknowledge the deep complexities and challenges that this presents for our society. But I think it's also important to cultivate an awareness of the creative approaches and the more positive things that are being done to address this. And with that, I'd like to turn to our panelists here and introduce them. On my immediate left, we have Reverend Bill Stanfield, who is the CEO and co-founder of the Metanoia Community Development Corporation, which is a North Charleston-based nonprofit that's focused on change for the individual and change for the community. And they do that in several ways, including with education at the elementary school level. To his right, we have Joanna Bruno, who is the membership coordinator for the Lowcountry Food Bank. If you guys aren't familiar with the Lowcountry Food Bank, you should be, because there are lots of opportunities as individuals to contribute in South Carolina. So it's a pretty broad piece of work. And then to the far right, we have Ann Jackson. Ann is the annual fund manager for Crisis Ministries, which is on Meeting Street here. And it's a local organization that provides food, shelter, and hope for individuals and families. And Crisis Ministries, you should know, is actually the largest provider of homeless services in the state of South Carolina. So with that, Ann, maybe we can start with you. If you could offer us an overview of the work that your organization does and the challenges that you face.
Yeah, this is something I could talk about for a long time. There's a lot to say, for sure. But first, I do want to just say I'm one of 59 employees at Crisis Ministries. People think we're a pretty small organization, and we do use our resources wisely, but we do have 59 employees devoted to ending homelessness and hunger here in the Lowcountry. Crisis Ministries was just a brief overview of our organization. We were founded in 1984 when community leaders noticed an increase in the number of people seeking shelter in public buildings. And people who study homelessness will, you'll notice that in the 80s, a lot of homeless shelters popped up around the country. There are a number of reasons for that. Two large ones being that during this era and the couple of decades before that was the deinstitutionalization of mental health patients in hospitals. So they're being forced not to live in institutionalized places anymore, and so they're out on the streets now with nowhere to go. Also, in that time period, the federal government, stopped putting so much money and financial resources toward affordable housing. So if we're not subsidizing housing to the extent that we were before as a country, then you're going to have more people, again, who can't afford housing in your community, and they become homeless. So we talk about how that was a very cold winter in Charleston, and so more people were coming out, and that's true, but there are other factors at play as well. So we've since 1984, we've grown from an organization that was primarily volunteer run. We didn't have a building. We were rotating in and out of church social halls, school gyms, empty buildings downtown. Volunteers were coming in and preparing food in a soup kitchen, and we're staying up overnight with folks who were sleeping on the floor just to get them off the streets and out of public spaces. Now we have 4 shelters in Charleston and in Somerville, and provide beds for 155 men, women, and children every night. Within those numbers are 2 dorms specifically for male and female veterans. So we're working to address the issue of veteran homelessness as well. We serve about 200,000 meals every year to homeless and hungry people in our community out of our community soup kitchen, and then including the breakfast and dinner we serve to people who are living with us as well. So in addition to food and shelter, which in and of itself is important but does not end homelessness, gets you off the street, but it doesn't address the issues of what got you there to begin with. So we provide a variety of supportive services to help people address some of those root causes of their homelessness, which vary from person to person. Programs like we have a health clinic on site, we do mental and primary health care. We have civil legal services, we have 2 attorneys on staff who help our clients with various civil legal needs. We have counseling. Everyone who stays with Crisis Ministries works with a counselor. Housing counseling, budgeting classes. We have an employment education facility where we teach basic adult education, and then also have an employment counselor to help you find a job if that's the appropriate direction for you to take to help you get back on your feet and into a home of your own. But I will just tell you really quickly about one family's story, and then I won't hog the floor the whole time, I promise. But I don't know if y'all can see this, but this is Lindsay and Guy. Lindsay's the mom, Guy's her son. She was a U.S. Army veteran who fell into some tough times, and she and Guy were going to be living in her car, which is what a lot of people do when they find that they're going to be evicted or they lose their home. They go to their car if they have one. And then somewhere along the line, she was referred to Crisis Ministries. So she came in, and through a variety of partnerships we have with other organizations in this community, for example, she was a veteran, so through our partnership with the VA Medical Center, which she was able to get the medical care that she needed. Through our homeless employment learning program that we call our HELP Center, do a little acronym, she worked with our employment counselor and was able to secure a job. Then with one of our housing counselors, they helped her find an apartment that she could afford, and she and her son are now in their own 2-bedroom apartment. She has a job. He's a straight A student at Sanders Clyde Elementary, and he's captain of the squash team. So they're doing very well, which is always good to hear. And they were awesome and were willing to talk to the media a little bit about their story. And I think sometimes we don't hear as many stories about homelessness because it's embarrassing and people don't want to tell the world that this is a struggle that they're going through. So it's hard to find people who are willing to open up about it. But last year we provided services to over 1,650 people in the Lowcountry area. So, and about half of those people were able to stay in and not lose their homes or move back into permanent housing after working with us. So there's an overview, and looking forward to the rest of our discussion. So thanks.
Thank you. Joanne, could you share with us a little bit about the Lowcountry Food Bank, the work that you do, and perhaps how homelessness can interact with your services?
Absolutely. So yes, I work with the Lowcountry Food Bank, and the Lowcountry Food Bank's mission is to serve those that experience hunger in the 10 coastal counties of South Carolina. So you may see our presence here in Charleston, but we're actually all the way down in Beaufort, all the way up to Myrtle Beach, and all those counties in between. What we do is, well, one, we're part of the Feeding America network of food banks. I don't know if some of you guys have heard of Feeding America, but that means that we are working with 200 food banks that are just like us across the whole United States. So there's actually not a county in the U.S. that is uncovered, which is awesome. And what we really are at the Lowcountry Food Bank is we're a distribution center and clearinghouse for food. So we go out, we find food through donations, through purchases, through any means. And what we do is we work with member agencies. We have about 300 member agencies through our 10 coastal counties to actually do the distribution directly to the clients. So we don't actually serve clients directly at the food bank. We work with our partners. So our partners can be, for example, we work with food pantries. Food pantries are a place where we send clients to get non-perishable goods. Those are goods that they can take home and cook with, canned food, pasta, cereal. We also partner with places like soup kitchens where a client can go to receive a hot meal. We partner with shelters like Crisis Ministries, and we have community partners like Metanoia that run some of our programs like our Kids Cafe. That's a place where a child can go or is there to receive a hot meal after school. So last year, together with our partners, we served about 220,000 individuals and distributed about 19 million pounds of food throughout the 10 coastal counties. And as far as how we work with homeless, this is what I'll say. Most of the people that we serve are not homeless. because there are, of course, plenty of hungry individuals out there that are not homeless. But what we're so thankful for is that those that are, we have awesome partner agencies that service those individuals, like Crisis Ministries is a great example of that. But what we know we do is to serve a lot of people who may be kind of on the brink of becoming homeless. So if they weren't able to go to a soup kitchen, food pantry, and get that food at no cost, they may not be able to pay their rent. Do you see? So it's a choice that people make, and we know this through the Hunger in America study that was done, that right now out of our service population, the clients that we serve, 32% of them, so that's about a third, every month make that choice between paying for rent or paying for food. So if we can help satisfy their food needs, well then maybe they will have a little bit more money to pay their rent or pay their food. So happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And Bill, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the work that Metanoia is engaged in, and perhaps you offer the easiest opportunity to begin considering how sustainability fits into this.
Yeah, what we do at Metanoia is something called asset-based community development, which is years ago a couple of sociologists at Northwestern went around the country and studied neighborhoods like the ones where we live and work. Most of our staff live in the same neighborhood we serve. And what we used to do in nonprofit work, we would go to distressed neighborhoods and we would do needs assessments. And we would think that if we just studied people's needs and try to start filling needs, we would help folks kind of recover. And these guys discovered that actually there was an inverse relationship between the success of neighborhoods in the aggregate and the number of needs providers there were in those neighborhoods. So the number of needs providers, the more needs providers there were, more people with good intentions studying problems and trying to fill those needs, actually the weaker the neighborhoods seemed to be becoming when you looked at their outcomes in aggregate, crime and educational success and that kind of thing. And they began to realize that with the best of intentions, we had kind of conspired against distressed neighborhoods to focus only on their problems. Everybody in this room has problems. Everybody in this room has things you're not good at. Chances are, if you're staying in school, you're not studying the subject, you're not majoring in the subject you're worst at. You're majoring in the subject at least you have some proficiency in. And so they pioneered a new approach to reaching out to distressed communities called asset-based community development, which is really a matter of trying to find where are the gifts, skills, and capacities of either individuals or neighborhoods, and how can we attract investment to those gifts, skills, and capacities. And we do that at Metanoia kind of in three primary areas right now. One is youth leadership development. So we take kids from, they're all kind of in stressful situations, low-income communities, tough, at-risk kids, but they get recommended to us for showing leadership potential by the local schools, and we work with them every day after school. We do housing development, mostly single-family detached housing so far. We're looking at some multifamily housing. And so we work kind of upstream. Some of our families may have been or will be, if we can't get them in the housing and keep them there, at risk for homelessness. But then we also do some economic development stuff. And so we walk kind of an interesting line, actually, as a community developer that lives in a very distressed neighborhood where there are some homeless folks there, figuring out how we connect those homeless folks with opportunities. And at the same time, be concerned for the overall stability and safety of a community. I'm not very sympathetic to folks that own businesses in Columbia that want to ship, that there aren't folks always there without any place to go that are causing the neighborhood not to kind of reach a level of recovery. So we have to think about all these things together. And it gets into kind of the systemic reasons behind homelessness, which we touched on a minute ago, which, the closing of I actually, before I came to start Metanoia about a decade ago, I worked for 2 years as a chaplain for a homeless and transitional housing organization in Philly. And they operated a number of facilities, all the way from shelters where guys could stay overnight without any kind of plan for recovery. A lot of those guys have been on the streets for years, all the way up to single room occupancy buildings and apartments, and just kind of try to move people through a continuum. And that's starting to be built in Charleston more and more recently through Crisis Ministries, Family Services, and other homeless coalition partners here. And so figuring out ways to, but at a community developer level, what we want to figure out is ways so that we build local neighborhood economies where everybody has a place, and people don't have to end up being homeless and depending on, the shelter pathway. And we're glad that's there, but how can we build stronger opportunities for people to grow their gifts, skills, and abilities so that we don't have to have homelessness in the first place?
Thank you. Ann, let's get back to you for a moment. Before we got started, Ann was telling me that Crisis Ministries is engaged right now in expanding the services that they'll be able to provide because they're building a new facility adjacent to the existing facility. And I asked her, is that good news or bad news? Because there's a demand, and they're meeting the demand. But really, what does it tell us? And I wonder if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. Well, and I said back to Dan, I wish I was unemployed and that there wasn't a need for a homeless shelter in Charleston. This has just kind of been on my mind as we've been talking. I will say that Charleston is not like Columbia, which is a good thing in a lot of ways, but this community has done a lot for years to support homeless and hungry people and at-risk communities. I'm sure we can always do more. I wish there were more financial resources that we could pour into these various programs to help folks out, but Charleston does do a lot, so just I think we sometimes are kind of in our own bubbles and don't think about it as a whole in the community, but there's a lot going, a lot that this community does to help folks who are hurting in this way. We are building a new shelter, a new men's shelter, directly adjacent to our current men's shelter on Meeting Street. If you drive by on Meeting Street, Upper Meeting Street, right before you get to the base of the Ravenel Bridge, you'll notice a little kind of mint green building with a little teeny sign out front that says Crisis Ministries, and you're like, that's teeny, what's going on in there? Actually, 84 people live in that building, and about 200 people come through our soup kitchen every day for lunch. We have another building behind that's for women and children. We have a little house on our property that's for 4 families to live in, meant to be more of a transitional space. And then we do have a shelter in Somerville for 20 women and children as well. But yeah, the new shelter, we're growing our capacity up to 110, so just a little bit of growth there, primarily in our dorm for male veterans. We're going from 14 to 40 beds, which is a huge growth, and that's really kind of working with the federal government has made a goal to end veteran homelessness by 2015. I'm not 100% sure that will happen by 2015. I think that there'll continue to be veterans who struggle over generations to come as well. So I think that unfortunately we'll continue to have that problem. But they're putting a lot of resources into ending veteran homelessness. So that's really our growth area. By having more beds for male veterans, the veterans who are not in that dorm in our main men's dorm will be able to move into the vet dorm, so we're opening up more space, in both places, if that makes sense. But I think, the numbers around town that we hear and we see that we think are about accurate, that there are about 3,000-ish homeless people in Charleston area. So, I know I'm not totally, the 2,200 in South Carolina, a lot of these numbers come from point-in-time counts. So the local homeless coalitions, which is a coalition of all the various providers in a community. Ours is the 7-county area, so we're not going up to Myrtle Beach, but we're going down to Beaufort with our homeless coalition in this area. But they once a year go out and count the number of homeless people. So it's not a perfect way to look at those. It's the best we can do right now. So just in terms of some of those statistics, I think I kind of went all over the place there. I'm not sure if I really answered your question.
It is a difficult situation to put numerical values on, it seems to me.
Yeah.
Joanne, you mentioned that across the 10 coastal counties you have a number of partners that you work with. I'm curious about, and then I mentioned some of the responses by municipalities across the country. What sort of a relationship do you have with the city of Charleston? Do you consider the city a partner in any way?
They're not a member agency. They're not doing direct distributions or direct client services, but certainly we consider the city of Charleston a partner, just like we do the city of Myrtle Beach. We try to keep connections with contacts through all of our cities, but they're not a partner per se, as in they're going out and directly feeding on our behalf. They're not running a Lowcountry Food Bank program per se, but we would consider them a partner for sure.
I think anybody who studies sustainability is familiar with the food issues.
Yes.
And future concerns there. Is there a long-term vision on the part of your organization that has taken that into account?
You know, we know, just like with a homelessness problem, we're going to always have, to a certain extent, a hunger problem, and we're aware of that. I think that what changes for us are the types of programs we offer. You know, for example, this year we really have started to target seniors a lot. We have a huge senior hunger initiative going on right now, where we're offering monthly food boxes essentially to low-income seniors. So I think our long-term vision is to continue to be very flexible, to offer programs and services based on the needs, and to make sure we're addressing those needs. But I'd say our long-term vision is to keep feeding people. So.
Bill, I may be putting you on the spot here, but
Go for it.
Ann shared with us a success story from one of the people to whom they provided services. I wonder if you have a success story for us regarding people that you work with at Metanoia.
Well, you know, because I can kind of speak to the food issues. I mean, we do partner with folks from the neighborhood. Like we've started, our goal is to kind of build economies. For me, it's, I haven't built a community, a successful community, if the options of my neighbors are either to go stand in line for free food, with all due respect to what the food bank does, which is good stuff, or pay 3 times as much for bad food at a convenience store. Neither of those is a good option for my neighborhood. What we need to do is think about how do we build community economies that build systems of exchange where people can have more food options, food choices, can get healthy food without having to, pay an arm and a leg for it. So we have, partnered with a local person who is a homeowner through Metanoia, who is now a master gardener, and we started a number of community gardens around the neighborhood so that people, with regard to food, can learn how to grow their own food, and not just have a community garden, but also this has spawned other gardens in people's backyards and that kind of thing as well. And so by really trying to identify people in the neighborhood who can bring resources to bear to deal with the issues that we face, and then investing in those folks to grow their capacity to do good for the neighborhood, we build hopefully a more sustainable economy in the community along the way. Which is really, for us, kind of the ultimate goal is to build a connectivity and an economy in the neighborhood that actually diminishes the need for services, diminishes the need for agencies, including ours, and builds the capacity of people to solve their own problems along the way as well. So whenever we see an instance like in community gardening or in the neighborhood, we're in a fight right now with, because there's just now starting, there's a big rail yard that's being built adjacent to our neighborhood, so we're organizing the community now to get mitigation things put in place as a result of that. And we're working on getting a grocery store in the neighborhood also, because this is something that people from the neighborhood have said they want to see happen. So we're working with the city of North Charleston, which is where we're based, to try to attract a grocery store and figure out what incentives we need to offer and those kinds of things as well. And all that has to do with kind of looking holistically at a neighborhood, and not just individuals within the neighborhood who may have some risk factors, but really trying to build a community so that healthy communities, we believe, build healthy people. So if we build the community, we build the person at the same time.
I wanted to go ahead and open this up to questions that anybody might have for our panelists today. Do you have any other issues or other parts of this issue you'd like to explore? Jesse?
Yeah, I'm really glad you touched on the food issue, and there is an inherent difference between providing food and providing nutritional food. And I know that's a challenge with certain food banks and certain community groups and organizations. And that is a strategy that different communities have used in terms of gleaning food from gardens and things like that. What kinds of challenges have you encountered in that process? And if I understand correctly, are you helping different people in your community to grow food that food will then go to some of your programs that will be distributed to people, or is it to sell the food, or is it
Right
people that grow it?
Right now, either we have two kinds of forms of garden. One's our community gardens, and they're all open gardens, so anybody can come pick food anytime, and they can take it home with them. And then we have personal gardens that we're helping facilitate a consultant to help people work with their, if they want to put a garden in their backyard, we'll help them organize that. They got to do the work. We don't give anything away at Metanoia. There's always going to be a system of exchange built, because that's what builds the economy of the neighborhood. And so, but there, not everybody wants to garden.
Well, not everyone that we're talking about homelessness has a place to build a garden.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, work upstream a little bit from where folks who are dealing with homelessness. We interact with homeless people and that kind of thing. And I certainly have plenty of folks who approach me on the street in my neighborhood that are homeless or near homeless, and if only just for a few bucks. So we have a lot of interaction with homeless folks in the neighborhood, but we haven't had a strong focus on that side of the neighborhood ourselves, just because we've had other priorities that the community has identified as being more important at this stage. So I don't know if I answered your question or not.
It's addressing a larger issue.
Yeah.
If I could add something to that, just about the distribution of healthy food, that at the food bank, we definitely have a healthy foods initiative. So over 60% of the food that we distribute is actually healthy food. And we're very conscious of what we give people. And we're also very conscious that people just like you and me should deserve a choice, right? We're not going to say we're only going to give you fruits and vegetables. They're humans. Sometimes they want a piece of cake, sometimes they want, but we do make a big effort to make sure that people do have healthy food choices. And we try to make sure that our pantries offer food that can cater to people that may be diabetic or may be on a certain diet. So the face of food banking, actually, you will see just nationally, has really shifted from a lot of non-perishable goods to tons of produce. And also, as you can imagine, as a donor, like a grocery store, right, you're going to be maybe more willing to part with a cantaloupe that's not going to make it than a canned good you're going to be able to sell on your shelf later on. So I feel like there is a lot of healthy food out there.
Are there
and available.
Do you face challenges? Are there codes that prevent you from getting donations from maybe unlicensed places?
Not so much. And we accept food from farms that have had their fields, gleaned. All the food that comes to us does go through a reclamation process where it's checked out, and if it's not suitable, we don't serve it, things like that. But as far as produce and stuff like that goes, we accept it readily. Yeah. So I just wanted to add that on there.
Yeah, we do the same thing. We rescue food from grocery stores and restaurants, and most of the food we serve is donated to us through this food rescue program that we have. And then we also receive donations from folks just who show up, here's some whatever, But we try very hard to make sure we're serving healthy meals, and really only recently have started actually purchasing food to be able to round out some of those gaps from the donations and make sure that what we are serving are balanced, nutritious meals. But we'll shout out to Whole Foods, donates to us every single day, and it is boxes and boxes. They don't keep their produce on the shelf long, so it's lots of fresh organic produce, and that's what we're serving in our soup kitchen. So I'm proud of the work that we're doing to try and make sure that we are serving healthy meals to people.
Go ahead, Jen, I'm sorry.
So as a Charleston community member, all of us sitting here, kind of in each of your different areas, what is the number one way that we can help contribute to creating solutions? I understand it'll be different for each of you.
Sure.
But each just kind of highlight, how can we help?
Well, do you want me to go?
Sure, go ahead.
Sure. I'd say, how can you help? You can, one, be involved. We always tell people, as far as volunteering, sponsoring a food drive, it doesn't have to, you can approach just about anybody. You can approach elementary schools. Nobody is off limits, and say, hey, will you host a food drive for us? That's an easy way to help. There's ways to help to come and volunteer. Of course, there's ways to help as far as donating goes. There's ways to help in just advocating and getting the word out there that, for us, we often tell people, 1 out of 4 people in the 1 out of 4 children in the Lowcountry experience hunger. I have a daughter that's 8. I have a daughter that's 5. That breaks my heart to think about a child, feeling hungry. We are able to meet the needs, but it's spreading the word about resources available, and it's getting involved.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you, especially about just kind of understanding what the organizations in the community are already doing, and kind of just being able to advocate and spread that message as well. Certainly the same thing. We do a variety of drives and need volunteers to help us lead drives, food drives, toiletry drives, other items that we can give to families when they move out and back into a home of their own. Most of the folks, when they come to Crisis Ministries, they don't bring many possessions with them or have them anymore. So we like to try and send them away with some pots and pans and plates and whatnot. Also certainly financial donations, I think we'll all agree, is something that we all need just to be able to continue to operate, to continue to provide services, to continue to keep the lights on and run the stove and whatnot in the kitchen. We usually, right now, because of our construction and some safety concerns and parking limitations, we don't have volunteers serving in our soup kitchen, but as soon as we get through this construction phase, coming and serving a meal is a great way to kind of see what's going on and interact with folks who are homeless at that moment.
Yeah, I mean, you guys have heard the story about the babies in the river from India? Anybody heard this story before? Nobody's nodding their head, so I'll tell the story. So, all right, so these 2 guys are walking down beside a river, and they see a baby floating down the river. This is a problem, right? So they jump in the river and they save the baby. And no sooner should they get the baby out and kind of make sure it's doing okay as they see another baby floating down the river. So they jump in the river again, see the baby again, and this happens, again. Finally, about the 9th or 10th child that's floating down the river comes floating down the river, and one of the guys jumps in to get the child out, and the other one just keeps walking. What is this, donor fatigue? So he says, why aren't you, the guy in the river says, hey, why aren't you coming to help me get this child out of the river? Where are you going? Why are you keep walking upstream? And the guy said, well, that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm headed upstream because I want to find out why these babies are being put in the river, and I'm going to stop whatever is putting the babies in the river. So at the same time that I would encourage volunteerism, and I would encourage relationships with not just agencies, but with homeless people themselves, with people in distressed communities themselves. I would also encourage you all to head upriver, to think about, I would wager to guess, I don't have that minuscule amount of coverage of homelessness in America, I would wager to guess that 85% of it was some feel-good success stories to end. We end tonight's broadcast with this story of a homeless family who got on their feet, and never a substantive conversation about what is it about our society, the richest country in the world, that we think we can allow this kind of stuff, and how can we move upstream a little bit to try to prevent the need for homelessness. And there are cities across, there are areas, groups across the country, and Charleston's doing pretty well, at least for the southern part of the United States, that are really, have solutions. It's not a matter of not having solutions. It's a matter of not having the public policy and the public will to put those solutions in place. We can provide, in Philadelphia where I worked, there was housing options for people that were dually diagnosed, which means they had mental health issues and substance abuse issues, and they were provided housing. It was very, modest housing, but it was housing nonetheless. And the minute you provide housing for somebody, it benefits everybody in society, including the individual. So how can we move upstream and think more about what is it, as a guy who was a chaplain in a homeless and transitional housing organization for 2 years, the incidence of veterans who are much higher incidence of veterans, that is not incidental. The guys I was friends with in the early 2000s were all coming out of Vietnam. And their experience in Vietnam was a leading cause of their being homeless. I was a chaplain, so we talked about this stuff. And my guess is it's going to be the same now. I mean, people are coming back from conflicts, and this stuff, you know. So how do we as a society treat our veterans? How do we as a society decide where we're going to send our veterans and when we're going to send our soldiers? Realizing that these things that we get involved in have long-term consequences for our society. That's moving upriver. So being able to think about, especially at the level, you know, where you are in your life as college students, thinking about how you're going to live your lives and how you can kind of move upriver is an important piece of the puzzle as well.
That's a wonderful response. We actually had a question over here first. Excuse me, Alan.
I admire all the work that you're all are doing addressing this issue, but as private charities, you're inherently limited in scope, primarily based on donation, goodwill, and so on. So do you think, or what sort of criticisms would you have of not only state and federal governments, but perhaps other institutional factors that have been not only absent from this debate, but actively working to undermine the poor communities that we have in this country? And we had a $5 billion cut in SNAP benefits this past year. So I mean, we have a conception in this country that to be poor is primarily something of your own doing. Is to be poor is to be you probably all heard this, lazy, so on and so forth. So and the federal and state governments have been derelict in their duty to provide adequate housing, provide economic ability. So as like I said earlier, I admire what you do as charities, but you're going to be limited inherently. So what sort of larger criticisms do you think are at play here, whether it's with our societal conception or whether perhaps with our economic structure that favors one class over another, one very small portion of the population over a much larger sort of breadth of society?
I don't know this for certain, but I would be almost certain that the largest homeless facility in Charleston County is not the Good Work and Crisis Ministry, but it's the Charleston County Detention Center on Leeds Avenue. It's certainly the largest mental health facility in our county by a large margin. It may not be the largest homeless facility, but it is the largest mental health facility. And it's not doing anybody any favors over the long term, because these guys, there's a book that came out a couple years ago, New Jim Crow, that's worth reading. These guys are coming out of, once you go into prison, you come out and you've got a record, and it's harder to vote, it's harder to get a job. Many of the people who land up being homeless have had some interaction with the criminal justice system, and that is a direct, their homelessness is a result of that interaction. And we've, across the political spectrum, spent the last 20 or so years getting tough on crime. And now we're realizing we got so tough that we have an unemployable class of citizens that can't almost help but become homeless. And so thinking about those issues from a public policy standpoint, how can we get folks out of prison and back to work and back contributing to the society, rather than so marginalized that they either are going to end up back in a shelter or back in the jail themselves, I think is one way to think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you. We are a private charity. We do receive about 60% of our budget comes from federal sources, so we do receive a lot of federal funding primarily from the VA and also from HUD to provide shelter to people. Obviously, I think there's some policy changes certainly that will continue to help, but I mean, I think the mental health issue also really needs to be addressed. How we're caring for people with serious mental health issues. We have a psychiatrist on our staff part-time. His opinion is that everyone who experiences homelessness at least experiences some depression and anxiety around that if they're not battling a severe mental illness on top of it. So, we kind of try and treat everyone like they're, in a caring way, and then consider that they probably have some sort of mental anxieties and depression at least that are affecting them when they get to Crisis Ministries. But yeah, I mean, I think addressing some of those issues, I'm talking about the housing and in Philadelphia getting folks into housing immediately. I don't know that South Carolina is ever going to have the financial resources to go to a housing first model. That's a trend in big cities. It works, but why it works is because then you've got people, staff, going in and checking on these folks regularly, so that if you're a user, you're being checked on. We're making sure that you're taking care of yourself. Are we ever going to have the resources here to build housing for folks who have a variety of problems, and then also take care of them, help them, check on them? I don't know. But yeah, I would encourage you to vote. Think about those long-term implications when you're choosing who you want to vote for and who to represent you, and who what you want these policies to be.
I think we have time for one more question, Helen, if you...
Thanks. I was basically asking something similar to what Ron was asking, but could I ask about the gender component of what you observe in the communities? Where does gender play into all of this?
In terms of the number of people who are homeless, I mean, certainly I think we're sheltering more. Well, I say that. We're sheltering a few more men than we are women. Maybe I think our breakdown is about 60-40. There tend to be more resources for women with kids. For kids, no one wants to see homeless kids. So other groups tend to jump in and try and help single women with children. And typically, this isn't always the case, but typically if there are kids involved, they're with the mom, not the dad. So you're going to see more men by themselves and more women with kids, obviously. So, there tend to be other resources. Family members tend to be more willing to take folks, people in when there are kids involved. So I think because of that, we tend to do, we see more men. But the stereotype of, the drunk, homeless, African-American man that you see, that doesn't really hold true. Family homelessness has increased for us from 2011 to 2012, it was up 64% in the number of families we served. And typically those families are single moms with kids. So there's definitely, it's not just affecting one gender or the other. It's close to 50-50. I don't have anything else to add on that.
Well, I think we're going to have to wrap it up now. I really want to thank our panelists for coming today and sharing their insights. I want to thank all of you for being here and being engaged. Thanks so much. And let's please give them a round of applause. And I'm not sure if they have the latitude to stick around and answer some questions privately, but if so, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan Dickison.